This is tape number ET60 from the library of the Howard Thurman Educational Trust. Two meditations by Howard Thurman. This is side 1 entitled The Moment of Truth.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. I'm beginning today by reading two paragraphs which a Canadian friend of mine sent to me several years ago. 8-year-old Johnny was very serious when I called him into the hospital and explained how he could save the life of his little sister. Mary, age 6, was near death, a victim of a disease from which Johnny had made a miraculous recovery only 2 years earlier. Now Mary's only chance was a blood transfusion from someone who had previously conquered the illness. Since the two children had the same rare blood type, Johnny would be the ideal donor. Johnny, I asked, would you like to give your blood for Mary? He hesitated for a moment, his lower lip trembling. But I have seen many people older than Johnny who were frightened by the idea of giving blood. So I thought no more about it. Then he smiled and said, "Sure, Dr. Morris, I'll give my blood for my sister." The operating room was prepared and the children wheeled in. Mary, pale and thin. Johnny, robust and almost cherubic. Neither spoke. But when their eyes met, Johnny grinned broadly. As Johnny's blood pulsed into Mary's veins, her pale skin began to turn pink. There was complete silence as the operation proceeded. But then Johnny spoke in a brave little voice I will never forget. "Say, Dr. Morris, when do I die?" It was only then that I realized what that moment's hesitation, that almost imperceptible trembling of the lip had meant when I talked to Johnny in my office. He thought that giving up his blood for his sister meant giving up his life. In that brief moment of truth, he made his great decision. When a man becomes aware of the essential or the intrinsic or authentic meaning of an act or a person or a situation or an event, and the bearing of that act or situation, person or event upon his private life, he experiences a moment of truth. When he becomes aware of the authentic or intrinsic meaning of something and the bearing that that meaning has upon his private life, he experiences a moment of truth. There are several elements that are to be remembered here. The first is that it is always a personal and private and solitary experience. We spend so much of our time associating with other people. We are so involved in the human situation and the human predicament that we forget that fundamentally so much of a man's life is lived in solitariness. In all of the great moments of life, whether it is at the moment of his birth or the moment of his dying, whether it has to do with some great significant step that he is about to take, when deep within himself he makes the decision of commitment. All of these are intimate and personal and primary and solitary. And the moment of truth takes on this character. It is as if you and the experience alone existed in the world. It's like trying to explain something to a little child. You will explain it, and then the child will say, but why? Continue asking the same question, and then you explain it again, and the child will say, but why? And then you try to find a way by which you can find the proper words that will fit into the context of meaning of the child, and then utter these words so that the child understands. And when the child looks into your face and says, "Oh, I understand," it is as if the child and the moment alone existed in all the universe. It is a private opening of the life to a meaning which is personal, yes, but at the same time which expands out into a context of all the meaning that there is. Now, the moment of truth, then, has in it the element that is solitary, that is personal and private, and it also has in it a certain element of commitment, a certain element of involvement. I guess that's the best way to put it. I'm reminded of one of the experiences in the life of St. Francis of Assisi, when in the early part of his career, it seems as if he had a conditioning against leprosy. He could abide almost anything else except leprosy. This was so loathsome to him that he felt always as if he should move in the other direction or put as much space between him and the leper as possible. Shortly after his great commitment of his life, the story goes that he was riding along on a horse or walking, I don't remember that detail, but around the bend in the road, he encountered a leper. And for him, it was a moment of truth, because all the meaning of the disease as it expressed itself through the loathsome body of this man, and the bearing that this disease had upon the sensitivity of St. Francis, all of this converged in one swirling moment of encounter. And Francis drew back, turned, and started to flee in the opposite direction. And then he heard the voice, always the voice, reminding him of his commitment, that his commitment was something that was absolute, that he had given up in his commitment the initiative over his own life, Therefore, any sensitivity and all of these things were luxuries which his life could no longer afford. And he turned around, embraced the leper. And the story goes that he went with the leper back to the place where the leper lived, and he stayed there for several days administering to his need. The moment of truth is the moment when the intrinsic, authentic, significant meaning of an event or a person or a situation is sensed clearly and directly by an individual, and the bearing that this meaning has on the man's life. Now, the moment of truth then carries with it always the element of commitment. For when I experience the moment of truth, it is a total involvement, a total encounter, so that my life, not some phase of my life, some dimension of my life, some aspect of my life, but my life in some total sense is affected, is altered, shifts, changes, moves, makes some kind of adjustment to the fact that I have had such an encounter. It is solitary, it is personal, it involves the total commitment of the life in a direction contrary, perhaps, to the way one had been going before. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.
This is tape number ET60 from the library of the Howard Thurman Educational Trust. This is Side 2, entitled Pearl Without Price.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. I'm reading from Meditations of the Heart, The Pressure of Crisis. When Lloyd George, the British statesman, was a boy, one of his family responsibilities was to collect firewood for warmth and for cooking. He discovered early that always after a very terrific storm, with high winds and driving rain, he had very little difficulty in finding as much and more wood than he needed at the time. When the days were beautiful, sunny, and the skies untroubled, firewood was at a premium. Despite the fact that the sunny days were happy ones for him, providing him with long hours to fill his heart with delight, nevertheless, in terms of other needs which were his specific responsibilities, they were his most difficult times. Many years after, he realized what had been happening. During the times of heavy rains and driving winds, many of the dead limbs were broken off and many rotten trees were toppled over. The living things were separated from the dead things. But when the sun was shining and the weather was clear and beautiful, the dead and the not dead were undistinguishable. The experience of Lloyd George is common to us all. When all is well with our world, there is often no necessity to separate the dead from the not dead in our lives. Under the pressure of crisis, when we need all available vitality, we are apt to discover that much in us is of no account and valueless. When our tree is rocked by mighty winds, all the limbs that do not have free and easy access to what sustains the trunk are torn away. There is nothing to hold them fast. It is good to know what there is in us that is strong and solidly rooted. It is good to have the assurance that can only come from having ridden the storm and remained intact. Far beside the point is the why of the storm. Beside the point, too, may be the interpretation of the storm that makes of it an active agent of redemption. Given the storm, the fact of it, it is wisdom to know that when it comes, the things that are firmly held by the vitality of life are apt to remain chastened but confirmed, while the things that are dead, sterile, or lifeless are apt to be torn away. The wheat and tares grow up together, but when the time of harvest comes, only wheat is revealed as wheat, and tares remain what they have been all along, tares. It is a very simple remark that again and again, when life seems to be running smoothly, when all things seem to fall into line, and we are sure that for us this is the good time, the time of a certain kind of psychic or spiritual or actual physical prosperity. And during such times, there is no necessity, no felt necessity for assessing our equipment for life, our strengths, our needs. In our own country, for instance, one of the most critical problems that faces religion, that faces organized religion, that faces the church or the synagogue, is, what does religion say to a people who are fat, who have everything, who are so surfeited with good food and rich food that they must spend millions of dollars in trying to get rid of the logic of the good food that they're eating? Is there any word that can be addressed to a man who has everything and to whom the world, in a sense, is his oyster? This is the point here. At such times, we are apt to live life rather casually, to raise no fundamental question about its meaning, about our own sense of direction, about what our point is, because our situation does not force us to raise the critical and the crucial question. But if the time comes, as it does come to everyone, when the normal pattern of general at-easeness begins to disintegrate and break down, and it is necessary for us to assess life, to think about what life means, to raise the far-reaching personal question, what is it that I am meaning by all the things that I'm doing? What is my point? Where in the totality of my experience is there provided for me as a person some radical test in the light of which and on the basis of which I will be able to define what it is that I am trying to do, where it is that I'm headed? For it is only the radical test, the moments which seem to be unmanageable. It is only at a time when everything seems to be falling apart that a man discovers of what is his substance, what is his strength, what is there in him that is ultimately dependable, where in him may be found the resources that he needs in order to do his thing now in a hard circumstance, in a difficult moment. For if life is easy and if life is indulgent, then despite all of the comfort that it may bring, the most important question that we most want to know about ourselves, we cannot know. And that question is, what, after all, ultimately do I amount to? How much can I take? How much can I stand and not give, not yield, not buckle under? Am I a real man? So that when I take my stand, I can absorb whatever it is that life has to offer, and then I get something that is the pearl beyond price. I live with the confidence, and this is of overwhelming importance. I live with the confidence and the strength that I can stand anything that life can do to me. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer.